What's going on, guys? This is Robin. We are back with Thor, and this title is not even clickbait. This story is boss. Check this out. So this story basically takes place immediately after Banner of War. Now, for those of you guys who never saw the video that we did for the Banner of War series, this was basically a big fight between Thor and the Incredible Hulk. Thor as the All-Father facing off against the Incredible Hulk, who ends up becoming Titan Hulk over the course of the fight. And then there's like another caveat which gets even better, right? Like literally Thor becomes the Hulk. It's so cool. But the thing about this is why Thor's kind of mulling over what had happened, because one of the things that had taken place in this fight is that when Thor became the Hulk, he of course basically became mindless, and in the process destroyed the entirety of the Bifrost Bridge. Now, this is an important thing because, of course, the Bifrost Bridge is the way in and out of Asgard. Now, for those of you guys who are unfamiliar when it comes to Asgard and the Bifrost in Marvel Comics, it's just one method of teleportation. That Marvel often likes to play up the idea that the Bifrost is really the only way in and out of Asgard. It's the only official way. The reality here is there's all kinds of portals and means to get in and out of Asgard depending on what your level of power is. But what this does is it really leads Thor to kind of ask the question whether or not he is as capable of a leader as he truly believed he was. Now, a lot of this is Thor kind of comparing himself to Odin, because there wasn't really any instance where Odin had engaged in a series of actions that basically would lead to the potential ruin of Asgard itself. Thor's done that multiple times when he became the Herald of Galactus, this instance of destroying the Bifrost and cutting Asgard off. But lest we forget, Thor's kind of getting caught up in his own feelings here, because the reality is like characters like the Man-Gog exist because of Odin. For those of you guys who don't know who the Man-Gog is, he's like the one thing Odin feared the most, because Man-Gog could never actually be defeated, that he could just be held at bay. And when that guy came calling, all Asgardians fell before that guy. Like it was impossible to defeat the Man-Gog. Like literally Odin would just be in his throne room and somebody would come running in saying, "Oh my God, Man-Gog's here." And then Odin just craps his pants out of fear. Like that's literally what we were talking about when it came to that guy. He was dope. But the funny thing is that in the midst of all this, Loki appears. Now, of course, Loki being here is to kind of make fun of Thor a little bit, to kind of give him a hard time, but at the same time, Thor actually needs Loki. And the reason why is because he basically contacts him asking him, like, do you have a means for us to repair the Bifrost Bridge? Because you deal with magic and the entirety of the bridge was made with magic, and Thor's capabilities are not on the same level as Odin. That yes, Thor is technically in possession of the Odin Force, but the way in which Odin used it is drastically different than the way in which Thor uses it. Now, the other part about this, and this is one of the coolest parts of the story, Donald Blake. So one of the things to know here, for those of you guys who are new to the Thor mythos, Donald Blake, when he was first introduced to Marvel Comics, was like Thor's version of Clark Kent. Over the years in Marvel, they've toyed with the idea of Donald Blake, to the point that in fact, Donald Blake and Thor were physically separated and they were two distinctly different beings. In more recent years, Marvel undid that, right? So you still have basically Thor turning into Donald Blake and then Donald Blake turning into Thor. What we ended up learning here is that whenever Thor is walking around as himself, the Donald Blake persona gets whisked away to like some far off imaginary place. But because Thor had not changed into Donald Blake for so long, Donald Blake literally went crazy and he envied the life that Thor had. And so by some strange manner and means, he ends up basically escaping and then goes on a warpath killing all kinds of Asgardians. Ultimately, he's captured by really Loki and Thor, and then the punishment for Donald Blake is left to Loki. And when Thor asks the question, what was it that you did with Donald Blake? The response of Loki is, you don't want to know. What Loki had actually done is he had hidden Donald Blake down below Asgard in a place that no one can see, not even Sif, who now has the powers of Heimdall to see everything in existence across the entirety of the universe. And down in that tomb, right down in that just really crappy place, Donald Blake is strapped to a bed, and poison from the teeth of a snake constantly drips in his eyes, and it'll be that way for all eternity. Now that's going to become a major focal point as we get towards the end of this. But of course, with what Loki ends up saying is, of course, Thor, I'll help you with the Bifrost Bridge and that kind of thing. Once they get to its location, what Loki realizes is the Bifrost Bridge can't just be easily reassembled. That even someone like Doctor Strange, despite the fact that at this moment that he's dead, if he were alive, would not be able to easily clear it up. And the reason why is because while the Bifrost Bridge is largely composed of magic and whatnot, the truth about this is that it would be like demolishing a building and then trying to build a building on top of of all the rubble. It doesn't work that way. You gotta clear the rubble out, and then you have to build a new building. And that's literally what's going on here, that there are forms of magic and mysticism that were used to build the Bifrost, and those forms of magic are still there. So what literally has to happen here is all that magic has to be removed, eliminated, wiped out, and then replaced with new magic to build a new bridge. But the problem with this is that they don't know how long it's going to take, because the Bifrost bridge was built long before Thor and Loki even showed up on the scene, right? Like, it's been around for an exceedingly long amount of time. So as far as Loki's concerned, it could take like 10 months, it could take 10,000 years. Have no idea how long it would take to rebuild this thing. But what he says is there are other forms of travel in and out of Asgard if what you want to do is visit the other realms and make sure that our role of keeping them safe is still intact. They haven't fallen into chaos or anything like that. And so when Loki opens a portal to what would traditionally be basically limbo, what it does is it leads to like Darkhoth, the Dark Demon, just showing up out of nowhere. And it's one of those crazy things because there is a reason for why this happens. Right now, we will cover the reason for why he jumps out of here in a different video because it's just a little too complex to go into here. It's part of the Venom mythos, what's going on with Donny Cates' Venom run. So again, we'll probably cover that later on this week, so keep your eye out for that. But basically, Darkhoth just kind of shows up here, and where literally he just like emits this giant growl, and Thor and like Sif start to prepare, you know, battle armaments. The response of Loki is, well, I mean, we don't know if we need to fight this guy. Like, he's literally from a demonic realm. Maybe his whole stance, right, whoever this being is, because they don't know it's Darkhoth, but they're like, whoever this being is, maybe he's here and like the roar is a sign of friendship. And when he like literally smacks Loki, like attacks Loki, Thor gives this hilarious response where he says, ah yes, the hand of friendship. That's the great thing about this guy. He knows how to reach out and touch someone. So the thing about this is that as literally this guy starts ripping away at what's basically a symbiote that's attached to him, that's when Thor realizes it's Darkhoth. Now, a little bit of history about this guy. He's not overly interesting, and in fact, we haven't seen him since 1991 in Marvel Comics. Like, he's just been gone ever since the old Excalibur stories. But basically, he was at one point a guy named Desmond Pitts. And the idea behind this is that he was a friend of the Fantastic Four, but when he was working for NASA, he actually learned that Dr. Doom had sent Latvians to infiltrate NASA, and when he did that, he, of his own accord, infiltrated the Latvians and then eventually met Dr. Doom. But once Doom realized that he was a traitor, Dr. Doom broke every bone in this guy's body and then re-healed the bones using promethium, which is actually a material, a kind of magic of sorts from the realm of limbo. So he literally infused this guy with demonic energy and then sent him off to the realm of limbo. And that's basically where he's been ever since. And he's kind of ruled it off and on and different things like that. He has a pretty tortured past. What's crazy about this is you see those two little antennae on the top of his head? Those things can emit concussive blasts, or they can shoot hellfire. And that's literally what happens. This guy shows up here on the scene and then immediately attacks all of these guys and just starts blasting them with hellfire. Now, under normal circumstances, this kind of thing wouldn't necessarily harm Thor, right? Like a being with a magical attack, depending on their level of power. But lest we forget, when it comes to the realm of limbo and even the other hell locations, you're talking about power and fire that can kill gods. So while it doesn't necessarily destroy Thor, it is enough to harm him relatively severely. The bigger problem with this is that he ultimately ends up taking off. And when he does, what he ends up leaving behind is kind of a symbiote form of sorts. And when that happens, we basically end up seeing Venom emerge. Now, this is one of the things I want you to keep in mind here because this will become important as we get further into this. We'll make sense of all this stuff by the time we get to the end. So I'm not going to leave you hanging on information. Don't worry, it'll all come together. But Venom shows up here basically telling Thor his name's Eddie Brock, and he's like, I haven't seen you in a long time, yada, yada, yada. You look different, right? Like, you look a little bit different now. Of course, Thor kind of has a whole new wardrobe and everything because he is literally the all-father of Asgard now. But this guy, right, Darkhoth, just shows up and starts attacking all these different people and Asgard. And what Eddie Brock tells him is that at the moment, Darkhoth is actually infused with a baby symbiote, and that this symbiote doesn't quite understand what's going on here. A really good similarity here to understand is like how the Carnage symbiote is the offspring of Venom. That's literally what this is. Technically, the symbiote that's attached to Darkhoth is the offspring of another symbiote called Bedlam. Again, that's all part of the Venom mythos, and we'll make a separate video making sense of all that stuff. But the thing about this is that what Venom literally tells Thor is because the symbiote has taken hold of Darkhoth and is now using his mystical energy, you have a godly powered imbued symbiote that doesn't understand what's going on, but it's learning its power as it uses that power. So it's like a godly child just throwing a temper tantrum in Asgard. God only knows what it is they're gonna do. So while you do have a fight that takes place between Darkhoth and Venom, that initially Venom's defeated, Thor is able to kind of bring a momentary quell to the fight. But one of the things to remember about symbiotes is they can copy things, right? They can literally take on different physical appearances, and in fact, they can conjure things using their own symbiote form. And so what Venom tells Thor is that in this instance, if Thor's gonna fight this guy, he has to be aware that this symbiote is just copying the things that it sees. And literally, what's the most powerful thing that this symbiote sees right now? It's Thor with Mjolnir. And so literally what this guy does is he conjures his own Mjolnir out of his own symbiote form that's infused with demonic power. It's the antithesis of Mjolnir, essentially. It's pretty nuts. And so the fight between him and Thor is pretty knockdown, drag out, man. The fight is so extreme, and the magical energy imbued to this guy and his hammer is so extreme that as they're fighting and as their hammers hit, it actually starts to melt the metal that was used to rebuild the hammer of Thor. His hammer starts falling apart, and where you have like Eddie Brock and you have Sif that try to jump in, there's only so much they can do. By all standard of measurement, Thor's being overwhelmed here, and where Thor literally tries to chime in to, or really try to talk directly to Desmond Pitts and say, hey man, you gotta come back, you gotta pull it together. In all reality, he's kind of overtaken. There's no ability to communicate with that guy directly. And so realizing the situation and that the only way for Thor and Venom to defeat a demonic god that is one part symbiote and one part god is for they themselves to become one part symbiote, one part god. So literally, Venom bonds himself to Thor, and when he does that, they become like the god in black. Literally, Thor becomes Venom. Or I guess maybe Venom becomes Thor, whatever you want to call it. But I love what Donny Cates is doing here, because like literally in the last story arc, Thor became the Hulk. Now we get to see Thor become Venom. And I love these kind of stories that Marvel does where like somebody takes on a form that you don't normally see, and the potential power that comes along with it. Ever since the original King in Black story, the power of Venom has been bolstered several times over. He's way more powerful than he used to be. He's stronger, he's faster, he's more intelligent. So you take those heightened abilities and then you apply them to Thor, and it amplifies them even further. And so now Thor's able to actually hold his own directly against Darkoth, and is actually able to, for the most part, defeat this guy. But the reason why this comes off is that because when it comes to someone like Venom, we'll use him as an example here, Venom has been around for a long, long time, right? He's fought Spider-Man over and over and over again. And Spider-Man has used sound, and Spider-Man has used fire, but because of both his experience as well as his current set of powers, those kinds of things don't necessarily apply to Venom anymore. He has ways to get around the effects of sound, of sonics in, disturbing the symbiote. He has ways to get around fire in terms of disturbing the symbiote, right? Like in more recent stories, the symbiote has been forced to endure fire in order to do whatever it needed to do, hence building up a tolerance to it, right? It doesn't mean he's immune to it, but it means he's more capable of dealing with it than he was before. The other problem here though is that with Darkoth, this symbiote's brand new. It's operating on instinct. So it's afraid of fire and it's afraid of sonics. It's the Venom symbiote from 30 years ago in Marvel Comics. And so literally what it does is that in this kind of victory, it flees the body of Darkoth and it takes off, right? It literally bails out as fast as it possibly can. But what ends up happening here is that the hammer is of course left behind. And that's when Venom starts acting a little strange here, because literally it picks up the hammer and the response of Thor is, what are you doing, right? Like, I've realized ever since you've been here, you're hiding something. Right? Like there's like something about you is not quite right. And that's when we find out it is Eddie Brock, but it's not Eddie Brock. It's actually Meridius. Now, for those of you guys who are unfamiliar with the Venom stories that are going on right now, right? Clarify this for all of you guys. So the current set of events that are taking place in Venom at the moment is that we had the King in Black storyline, the introduction of Null the symbiote god, the guy who created all the symbiotes and controls all the symbiotes. Eventually, he was defeated by Venom, and then Venom assumed the role of King in Black. So now he has control of all the symbiotes and he operates in that way. What ended up happening is that there came a point when he basically died, right? Eddie Brock ended up being killed, and he woke up in what was called the Garden of Time, right? The Hive Garden technically is the name. But what he ended up encountering were these different symbiotes where you had like Wild and you had like Bedlam and you had all these different things. Meridius seemed to be the one that was leading all of them. What we ended up learning here is that all these different symbiotes that Eddie Brock met were basically him at different points in time, and that Meridius is quote quote-unquote his final form, or at least that seems to be the case. And so Meridius is the most powerful version of the symbiote or Venom that we've seen to date. And so literally the thing about him is, and he explains it here exceedingly well, he says, I am Meridius, the Edward Brock of your future, on a mission to save mine. The past is set in stone, it must be, but the future can be changed. I know this time period, Thor. I know you've seen your future, your fate. If you could turn back what is to come, wouldn't you at least try? Now, of course, what Meridius is talking about here is what Donny Cates has been foreshadowing, which is like Thanos showing back up with the Infinity Gauntlets and Thor's hammer and like the Destroyer armor while leading an army of zombies. We have no idea what that means, but it sounds amazing, and everybody at Marvel is excited to see what happens because it's gonna be really, really dope. But Meridius, basically as Venom, ends up turning on Thor, and initially he gets the upper hand on him, right? Because Meridius is extremely powerful. He's extremely capable. But one of the things that Thor says is that he's largely been holding back, especially in his fight against Darkhoth, because he knew something weird was going on when it came to Venom, and he really didn't want to reveal his whole hand. And so as he's facing off against Meridius, literally using lightning, which Meridius himself, despite how powerful he is not able to withstand lightning fire for any prolonged period of time, and literally overwhelms Meridius with his lightning, like just attacking him with just this constant onslaught. And so of course, it basically melts the hammer, the last vestige of this Bedlam symbiote, which just disappears into the ground, and then Meridius basically takes off, right? Like that Meridius form ends up bailing out. And so where the symbiote seeps into the ground, the response of Thor is, okay, so like, what do we do here? And where the answer is given, well, I mean, it seeped into the ground. Like, there's nothing down there. The response of Loki is, yeah, there's nothing down there. Nothing we need to worry about. Only for us to find out that what actually happened is the symbiote seeped below ground, down into the cavern where Donald Blake is being held, tortured by the serpent and its poison teeth. And the symbiote merges with Donald Blake, which means now Donald Blake, who had gone on a warpath and who had killed all the Asgardians, is re-emerging yet again, and God only knows what this guy's gonna end up doing. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.